Picture this. It's the summer of 1940. The situation for the Allies is looking beyond grim. France has collapsed, the British army is in tatters, and Hitler's war machine is parked right on the French coast. It looks like a German invasion of Britain isn't just a possibility, it's a certainty. But was it? That's the question we're digging into.
So, was it truly inevitable? You probably think you know the answer to that one. The story of the heroic RAF pilots saving the day. But the real story behind the invasion that never happened, well, it's way more complicated. And honestly, way more interesting than the myth. All right, first things first, we have to get our heads around just how bad things were for Britain. I mean, we are talking about a country pushed right to the very brink of total defeat.
So, by June of 1940, the headlines were just one piece of bad news after another. France was gone. The evacuation from Dunkirk, yeah, it was a miracle that saved the men, but they left nearly all of their heavy equipment behind. And then German forces actually occupied the Channel Islands. We're talking British soil. The forces left to defend the homeland were basically 15 understrength and totally undertrained divisions. Britain was on its own and completely exposed.
And this quote, it just says it all, doesn't it? The Home Guard, the new local defense volunteers, were so short on proper weapons that they were officially being told to carry packets of pepper. Yeah, pepper, to throw in the eyes of German soldiers. This wasn't some kind of joke. It was a sign of just how utterly desperate they were. The will to fight was there for sure, but the tools to do it, not so much.
Okay, so while Britain is bracing for impact, you've got a totally different drama playing out on the other side of the channel. Because that supposedly unstoppable German invasion plan, turns out it was a total mess, full of arguments, doubts, and some really big fatal flaws.
Okay, look closely at the wording on this one. If necessary. That little phrase is a huge giveaway. Hitler didn't actually have some grand long-term plan to invade Britain. He kind of admired the British Empire and was basically just waiting for them to surrender after France fell. This directive, it didn't even come out until mid-July, and it was a reluctant move, made only when it was obvious Britain wasn't backing down. This was a last-minute scramble, not some brilliant masterstroke.
And this slide, man, this really gets to the heart of the problem. You had two completely different ideas of what was going to happen. The German army, they're feeling invincible after rolling through France. They're looking at the English Channel and thinking, it's just a big river we have to cross. They wanted this massive invasion on a huge front. But the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, they were living in reality. They looked at the Royal Navy and saw it for what it was, this massive, overwhelming force that made the Army's whole plan pure fantasy.
And General Halder's reaction to the Navy's more cautious plan? He said he might as well put his troops straight through the sausage machine. Wow. He basically called it a suicide mission. So right there, you see it all. There's zero unity. The two branches that were supposed to pull this invasion off couldn't even agree on page 1 of the playbook.
So before the invasion even got off the drawing board, Operation Sea Lion was a complete logistical disaster waiting to happen. First off, no surprise attack was possible because of the tides. Second, they didn't have any proper landing craft. Their big idea? To use 2,400 river barges from the continent. Can you imagine? And on top of that, they had no specially trained marine infantry for an amphibious assault. And the whole time, the biggest problem of all is just sitting there waiting. The Royal Navy, the most powerful navy in the world.
So, for this ridiculously flawed plan to have even a ghost of a chance, one thing had to happen. One non-negotiable prerequisite. Germany had to absolutely own the skies over southern England. And that is what set the stage for the legendary Battle of Britain. We always think of the Battle of Britain as this epic duel between the Spitfire and the Bf-109, right? And they were incredible machines for sure. But the truth is, they were surprisingly well matched. The 109 had more firepower and could dive faster, but the Spitfire could outturn it in a dogfight. The real game changers, the things that actually decided the battle, had very little to do with the planes themselves.
Now, Britain had 3 huge advantages that were way more important. First, just simple geography. They were fighting over their own turf. If an RAF pilot got shot down, he could bail out, have a cup of tea, and be back in another plane the next day. A German pilot? He was captured. Second, technology. Britain had the chain-home radar system. This was a game changer. It meant the Luftwaffe could basically never launch a surprise attack. And third, it came down to doctrine. The RAF was designed from the ground up for one mission, air defense. The Luftwaffe, on the other hand, was built to support ground troops, a role it just couldn't play in this fight. So the battle raged on for weeks. Both sides were taking huge losses. And the RAF, they were being ground down. Their airfields were getting pounded day after day. It was a really close-run thing. And then the Germans made a mistake. A massive, decisive mistake.
If you look at the Luftwaffe's targets, you can see how the battle evolved. In July, they went after shipping in the Channel. Then in August, they launched Eagle Attack, hitting RAF airfields and infrastructure directly. And this was working. It was pushing RAF Fighter Command to the absolute limit. But then came September 7th. After a small British raid on Berlin, a furious Hitler changed the plan. He ordered the Luftwaffe to switch their attacks to London.
And this quote from Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, he was the commander of the most heavily engaged RAF group, is just incredible. He said, "I said, thank God." While London was burning, the man in charge of defending it was relieved. Why? Because he knew the Germans had just made a colossal strategic blunder. By bombing the cities, they took the pressure off his vital airfields, giving his exhausted crews the time they desperately needed to repair, rearm, and get back in the fight.
And that mistake, that was the turning point. That breathing room allowed the RAF to claw its way back, to regroup, and to ultimately win the battle for the skies. And in doing so, they sealed the fate of Operation Sea Lion before a single German boot could even touch a British beach.
I mean, just look at the numbers. The Luftwaffe completely failed in its objective to destroy the RAF. They lost almost twice as many planes. And what's more, a huge chunk of their losses were bombers, which meant bigger crews. We're talking over 2,500 experienced airmen killed. Those are devastating, irreplaceable losses.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the invasion was probably doomed from the start for a whole list of reasons. The Luftwaffe couldn't win air superiority, that's number one. The Royal Navy was still out there, a massive, undefeated threat. The German logistics for the invasion were a complete fantasy. Their own army and navy were at each other's throats. And maybe most importantly, Hitler's mind was already wandering east. And sure enough, by December 1940, the whole idea of invading Britain was basically off the table. Hitler issued Directive 21. His new plan? To crush Soviet Russia in a quick campaign. All that hesitant, if necessary language from Operation Sea Lion was gone. Now, it was all about the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa.
And that leaves us with a really interesting final question, doesn't it? Maybe the biggest victory of the Battle of Britain wasn't stopping an invasion that was, let's be honest, probably going to fail anyway. Maybe the real, lasting victory of the few was guaranteeing that Britain would survive, that it would remain this unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of Europe, the base from which the Allies would eventually strike back. In short, they guaranteed Hitler would have to fight a two-front war, the very thing that would ultimately bring his empire crashing down.